So, Anna, uh,
Yes,
I am grateful for our discussion of the general arguments surrounding artistic representation and memorialization of the Holocaust. And um, I feel that you have not only endorsed the idea um, that this is something that's permissible to do, contrary to some of the arguments that it's immoral or destructive in different ways, but that there's a real um, obligation and need, which are two different things. So that there's a um, Jews are, I think American Jews are raised feeling there's a communal obligation to remember the Holocaust, and it sounds like you feel that artistic representations is part of fulfilling that obligation, but also apart from a Jewish communal sense of obligation, that there is a human need to create these representations to enable us to do what it seems like are two uh, different kinds of things. One is um, to keep memory alive, but the other is to create present day experiences that connect the present and the future to what's happened in the past. So not just recording, writing it down, looking at photographs of it, but actually creating, as Guernica creates, new experiences whereby individuals confront different elements and are challenged to synthesize them in different ways. And in the act of that synthesis, this goes from being somebody else's past to being something that happens inside each of us in the present. Was that right?
beautifully put, really beautifully put. I don't know, is it this time for me to just respond to you
Please.
beyond that? But what went through my mind as I was listening to you, what happened to the idea that was so important in Jewish tradition that we were not supposed to have representation? Certainly not anything related to God or any experiences that were important. That was a forbidden. Wasn't it not in the Jewish tradition?
I
So
don't
when the state
suspect.
of Israel was established, and we were going to the beautiful town in northern Israel, and there were artists all over every spot. And I asked myself, that was not supposed to occur in a Jewish culture.
Mm.
That was forbidden. And so I don't have the knowledge, but I wish I would, to know what happened that instead of uh, having that forbiddenness, you're not supposed to do anything in God's image.
So yeah, it's a little bit different, and it's interesting if you look at the three Hebrew Bible-based religious traditions.
Yes, please.
Um, right. So if you look at Christianity, there is no what we think of as a
Limit.
prohibition against idolatry becomes actually just a prohibition against representation of what we would now call pagan deities,
Yes,
but
yes,
not, and if you look at, so that is much laxer than Jewish tradition. If you
yeah,
look at Islamic tradition, there's a much stronger prohibition, iconoclastic strain, so that, thus the
yes,
development
yes.
of mosaic arts.
Yes,
But But there was never a prohibition against artistic representations in Judaism, as you can see when they excavate ancient synagogues from a couple of thousand years ago in Israel. They often have mosaic floors that represent animals and other things. The prohibition in the Torah is against representations of God that are visible representations of God. But even as that prohibition is being given, it's given in the form of a narrative representation of God. So we read the story of Mount Sinai,
Yes,
and it tells us, it sets the scene very vividly. God,
yes,
a mountain and fire and lightning, and speaks with a voice and says, don't represent me in terms of anything that you can see. So it's clear as that's being given that this prohibition does not apply to narrative. It doesn't
no,
apply
it
to.
is, you see, you just explained something to me that I should have asked before. Somehow it just with the establishment of the state, in my own mind, there was an increase, not the opposite of prohibition.
Permission.
No, it was now okay to have images of the sort that I knew as a little girl, as a Jewish child, that we were not supposed to have those images. That maybe the biblical period in Jewish tradition, the biblical time, had introduced so many prohibitions that were not true for the ancient Jewish times. I think that we grew up, you grew up with the idea that you should remember the Holocaust, but I grew up with the idea that I was to know about Moses, but not necessarily to have a real idea of what he may have looked like.
Very interesting. I know that when you look at, if you ever go to a museum exhibition of Haggadot, right, Haggadahs from different times and places, many of
Yes.
them are illustrated in ways that I sometimes find surprising, but they're illustrations that include pictures of Moses and pictures of the plagues. Sometimes the pictures are in the letters, so it's a fusion of the emphasis in the Torah on, the word and written word and stuff. It fuses that with pictures. There's a beautiful, I don't even know what you would call it. My wife would know because she is a rare books curator. But yeah, there's a pretty wide range of Jewish visual practices, even though in general it was the visual arts had not flourished in Jewish communities the way that they have flourished in Christian.
That is what, yeah. I just want to be very sure that we get, again, busy with some points and not complete our thoughts related to the book and what the book says and what, Okay, so I want to be sure that we stay with that. And I know that the voices certainly would want us to do that. So I wonder if we should now be more specific about continuing the conversation related to what the book contains and why I happen to I happen to choose that image of the little boy with the menorah. There is a great deal in that. And then the question would be, what would be the difference between the original description of that scene with the little boy playing with the now you have to have
teddy bear.
Teddy bears. Thank you very much. Playing with that and not be aware of what is across the street, namely the Holocaust, and this kind of an imagery at that point. And what happened in this, if I can just quickly summarize, so we maybe stay with this conversation related to this image now. What happened? Because the first person associating to this image would just wonder, yes, I know the little boy is a Jewish boy. I know that from the beginning, but I don't know about the religion of the teddy bear. And that, I think, made that transition for me from that original poem to the next one, because now the second time the artist would look at it, or a new, not the same artist, a new artist will look at it. Now he has to divide the religion, it has to divide the imagery between the boy, who is definitely a Jewish child, but what about the teddy bear? What religion is he? Now there is a division. Mm-hmm. And then with the new voice, regardless when that new voice was created, a wonderful one, and now we can maybe even get the image from Howard.
Yes, could you put that up, Howard?
Howard, if you can show us the image. Here it is. First of all, that gorgeous face of that. Now we know he's a Jewish child, but we don't have the religion of the teddy bear. But as we learn from the new voices, now that the division is made in the culture, in the society, in relation to everybody, because the Jewish laws have been instituted, and this little boy is, if he is the a product of a Jewish family, a mother and a father, his chance of surviving the next few years is very unlikely. As a Jewish child, who knows, he may go to the United States, change that way, and survive. However, if he remains in Europe, his chances of survival is practically nil. Very, very little. And what happens to the teddy bear? He will be recruited in the SS, or in one of these places where he becomes the killer of the Jewish child or the Jewish children, depending very much on where this child is now growing up. He may have the opportunity to immigrate with his family. However, if he remains in Europe, he will be killed. He will be dead by the time this Dichter, I see German, this verse is written. I am sorry. I get very, very emotional because we lost 1.5 million of these beautiful people, Jewish children. And that is what will happen to him. By the time the new poem is written, this child is no longer alive. He was not allowed to grow up. You know that. He's killed by his own teddy bear. His teddy bear is going to be the one who declares that you are a subhuman.
Mm.
You are not a human.
Mm.
They will build a factory in which the like of you will be killed.
Mm.
And that is the story that New Voices is going to tell us about. How that happened, that for 12 years after the time when Hitler came to power and the end of this horrendous wars, 1.1 million Jewish children were killed. And the story will have to be told. And you and I now all have nothing other to do but to give this foreword, the introduction to the story that other generations will learn about this event. I am laughing because I am afraid that we cannot say it will never happen again. Chances are that now that we had learned this skill of killing people in masses, we will not give it up. And we have, maybe I should not talk anymore because I would love more conversation as to how did actually happen over the time. And I wonder whether you would like to come into this conversation and offer me another point that you would like us to relate to together in a conversation about the way in which this terrible crime was committed over 13 terrible years.
Thank you. I am You said so much, and I do this to my students also. They say so many things come out, and then I get in the way and I go back and I say, okay, let's take things one at a time. I want to make sure that we really think through them. But I want to start with the last two things you said and then go back to talk about the way New Voices works and how this photograph is working, because you demonstrated many different ways that it's functioning. First, New Voices includes different kinds of elements. It includes photographs, it includes captions of photographs, and which are two separate things. And in the draft that I saw, there's a big difference between the photographs and the captions. So you often don't know what the pictures are. You go from the pictures to usually a poem that responds to the pictures, sometimes a story that responds to the pictures, sometimes prose that's not fiction or poetry that reflects, as you're reflecting now, on larger issues or questions about how did this happen, why did this happen, how does it relate to the present. So there are many different elements, and I always tell my poetry students that if you want to communicate information, poetry is a very poor choice of medium. And I think photographs also are a poor choice of medium. So probably Homer would disagree with me. He would say, actually it worked pretty well with the Iliad, conveying history through poetry. But really, in general, I think that there are more efficient ways of considering large questions of what happened in what order and how did this happen, and sociological analysis of the sort that you're asking for. And while New Voices includes some of those materials, it foregrounds instead this very, I guess, montage of different elements that do not efficiently communicate chunks of information or chunks of perspective about these events, but that instead ask us to relate the different elements and meditate on them and think about them in new kinds of ways. Ultimately, I think that it is adding up to, I don't know if you know the Woody Allen movie, Hannah and her sisters.
I remember seeing it, but I do not remember. I know I had seen almost all of the movies. Yeah.
There's a bitter European artist living in New York, played by Max von Sydow, the great actor, and he's sitting at home watching television, and his much younger girlfriend comes home and says, "What were you doing?" And he's saying, "Channel surfing." And he's like, you know, he's trashing American culture. On this channel, there was this, and that channel, there was that. And he said, on one channel, there are these intellectuals saying, about the Holocaust, how did it happen? And he said, they can never answer the question because they're asking the wrong question. The question isn't how did it happen? It's why doesn't it happen more often? And I think that what you're saying about the human taste for genocide, I think that there is even some evidence, although it's not at all conclusive, that there may have been genocide between different early human species, Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon in some places, although there were other kinds of interactions, that there is a way in which genocide does seem to be part of the human potential. And that is balanced against this very specific, very modern, industrial scale institutionalization of genocide, which does new and shocking. And Howard, I'm wondering if you could put the picture back, because I wanted to replay, Anna, you had a series of very illuminating and deep responses to this picture. So I just wanted to tell you what I was hearing. One response was that you looked at it and you said, we see a beautiful child and a teddy bear. And the image doesn't give us any information about what the Nazis would call the race of the child. But because of the context that the picture is in, because it's in New Voices, in the context of these responses to the Holocaust, we know that that's the era it comes from. And then just as when Americans look at a picture of a child, they immediately look at the skin color and say, well, what race is the child? I can't interpret this picture in America unless I know about the race. You're pointing out, once we know that this is a picture of a child, during the Holocaust, we immediately say to ourselves, is this a Jewish child or is it not a Jewish child? And when we make that, as soon as we ask that question, as you said, the picture becomes not just a picture of one moment in time, which every picture is, but it becomes a picture of multiple possible futures for this child. And maybe,
Exactly.
Yes. So you said he could survive. He could go to America. He could stay in Europe, in which case his chances of survival are very small. There's the question of what happens to the teddy bear, because once the teddy bear isn't with the child, it ceases to become a Jewish teddy bear, right? And if we imagined him not as a Jewish child, that would multiply other kinds of futures. So I thought that was very a fascinating and profound response, to look at one instant of time and to see multiple possible futures in the starkest sense being captured in this picture of one instant.
Now, I will just I am continue to be a teacher. I'm making sure that maybe we had gotten as much of this as possible, because there was just one reference that you made in your comment that you actually used the word genocide. Did you earlier? And and because what this picture now tells to us in its small version, just what we see here, but in the larger picture, we would know that that experience, what happened in the Holocaust, was just one of the genocides of that 1 century.
Mm.
So you think of it, okay, there was one other genocide, the Armenian in the First World War, but after the Holocaust, we had a whole group following, not with the, and I don't have to name them all, because you probably have all of them in your mind. And so we all know, we also have to think, what did the Holocaust tell us about human survival in this century, as we now can look back on it? We had, I remember in my own lifetime, and that is why I thought maybe my own experiences and my own memories would be sufficient to have the foreword, because I am so old that I can remember so many of the actual events that you probably weren't yet alive when already after the Holocaust we had the whole group of incidents that mass murder was committed. And maybe, as I said, maybe this is the teacher in me, but I would say when I looking at this little boy and I see what his future may be, I have to think about all the other children of the Bosnian and the Rwanda, and there is probably no end, that this child represented the future of many children.
Yes.
That had to, and these were not even, as you would have said, legitimate wars. These were simply one religion, one not only religious was, I am thinking about Northern Ireland and England and all the others, that that is what consumed so much of human life, rather than paying attention, instead of paying attention to what to create. We, with our big brain, we ended up creating only destructive items, like the big bomb that now has to be carried from one president to the other. So it is very difficult to think about the Holocaust without recognizing that that may have been only the greatest and very most horrendous expression of a whole century that was almost as if it had been dedicated to destruction rather than to new life. I am so sorry. I sound terribly, I am not pessimistic, but this is what I learned from my life. Because as, I had seen it very close by.
There's a poem, there's an Israeli poet, Don Pagis, who grew up in
Pakistan, yes.
Bukovina, and he was resettled in Israel after the war. His parents were killed. He grew up in the camps. He learned Hebrew and immediately started writing poems. And one of the earliest was called Autobiography. And he says, I died with the first blow and was buried in the field. And as the poem goes on, you realize he makes it explicit that he is Abel and that his brother is Cain. And Pagus's way of representing what has happened to him
Yes.
is just like yours. Although even in a broader perspective, he said, yeah, right, at the very beginning of human history, you have this act of extermination, and that's the human family. One of the things that he does is he doesn't allow himself, in reflecting on this, to project outward onto one group. Oh, that's a German problem. That's a Rwandan problem. For him, it's always it's part of the legacy of that first family, where there are only 4 human beings on Earth. 2 of them are brothers, and one of the brothers kills the other brother. That to him is part of the essential DNA, really, of the human race. Not all of it, but an essential part of it. But I also want to emphasize that part of the way that you were talking, and Howard, could you put the picture back up again? Because one of the things that Anna is doing is kind of teaching us to read these photographs. In general, photographs are metonymic, right? We know that they're just a piece of reality. Actually, we had to learn to understand that. But now we look at this photograph and we don't say, oh my goodness, there was a world that was just contained to, a bear and a child, and it was floating around in the universe. We don't say that. We say that this is one piece of a larger world. And we don't say that this moment existed outside of time. We say this moment was a moment in contemporary history. That's metonymy. You say this is a part that represents a whole, that points us toward a whole. You pointed out that this is the act of metonymy points to different possible futures. And then just now what you said is this is also a metonymy for all of the children who are in genocidal or pre-genocidal circumstances. And so this is a part that represents that kind of a whole. And when we see it that way, then, as you said, I don't think it's so much about optimism or pessimism, but it's just that we have to look at this child and say, right, the children whose lives are contiguous with yours, they're alive today, and they're going to be alive in 20 years. There are always going to be children who are in this state where their childhoods are targeted in this kind of way, where their futures are split into these terrible possibilities, all of which, including the survivor possibility, include terrible loss and dislocation and wounding. And I'm noticing that the author, we can see the title of the poem that comes after it says 4 views, and it's almost like she and you were seeing this the same way. She's seeing one picture and she says, well, I can't only present one interpretation of this picture. I have to respond to it by presenting multiple interpretations, just as you have. I'm sorry, I interrupted you though.
No. I was just thinking that what I was thinking was, because there are all these ways of killing each other, like the brother it is for that very reason that we have to be so clever and really learning the ways in which we can give meaning to our lives. If that is the counterfront, the counter for, I'm so sorry. If that is against it, where does it say in the Torah, your job is to choose life?
Actually, the
Even,
elderly Moses, who is about to die, he is the one who
yes,
says right before he goes up the mountain for the last time.
yes. Is that Moses who said that? Because if that is what is in our uh, genetic makeup, that eventually we will do these terrible things to each other, then our job is indeed to be very creative in every way we can possibly be.
Yes, yes. And I'm so glad that you brought that quote into this, because I think one of the, I don't know if this is just an American problem. I think most people, when they're allowed to live their own lives, we just focus on our own lives. I mean, that's when soldiers go off to war, a lot of times what they're fighting for is just to be able to go back home and have a life where they don't have to worry about big things. But when we do that, we sort of assume that life is the default choice all the time. And that is what makes us vulnerable to genocide and other horrors. Moses, at the end of his life, he's looking at this new generation. They're older than this child, but they're the children of the slaves. The slaves are all dead. These are the children of the slaves and their children, and they're about to go into the land. And Moses has actually given the first recorded commandment to commit genocide. He said, when you get into the land, remember, kill everybody, destroy everything. And so Moses, there's an irony that I didn't think of until just now. When Moses says, I've set before you life and death, therefore choose life. Moses knows, don't take this for granted. Don't think that just by going about your business, you're choosing life. That's
Yes,
not what human beings do. Human beings think they're choosing life and they're actually choosing death. But he's also telling them choose to kill other people. Before and after that, he's given this other kind of commandment. And it's clear that this entanglement of the highest levels of human consciousness with the most terrible um, ways of construing collective identity, the way of construing collective identity that says, I can't be me unless I kill everybody who's you, right? That's the genocidal construction. Well, Moses is at the same time saying, be a people that actively, consciously, always chooses life, and also be a people that remembers that the nations that are there, you have to get rid of all of them, otherwise you can't be you. It's at the same time.
So, do we have another question or do you have to leave? I understand you have another.
I do unfortunately have to go, but I wanted to summarize that I think in this conversation, you've really shown us not the theoretical reason, well, why include pictures in a book like this? You're showing that they're not there as illustrations, right? They're not there as factual documents the way you would have pictures at a trial of a crime scene. You're showing that they're there because these pictures of the past provoke us to have very, very complex responses in the future. And although we didn't get to talk about it this time, I'm hoping that we will. The book makes sure that we remember that, because you can imagine readers do anything they want to with books. Authors always imagine that we can force readers to do things. The truth is, readers do whatever they want with a book. Teachers know that, right? Students don't read things just because you tell them to. So some people may just flip through the pictures, but the book doesn't allow this to become a book of pictures because it keeps interrupting that. Right after the pictures, there's always a complex textual response. And they're all very different, but they all are responses. Every time I read one of them, I would then feel like I had to keep going back as I'm reading the poem or the story. I'd have to keep going back to the picture and saying, well, wait a second, you're responding in this way. What is it you're responding to? Now, what going forward in the book is sending me backward to the picture. So even if I was lazy and I didn't respond in the complex ways you did, now I'm being prompted to respond in those ways. And even in the cases, because sometimes I'm like, no, I don't see the picture the way this author seems to have. Even that kind of a response forces me to be more personally involved in responding to the picture, which is to say, to take something that I might have just accepted as a piece of the past and say, and make it part of my present. Because if I say, no, no, I disagree, okay, I've now created my own interpretation. That's part of my present life going forward, rather than just a passive idea of, oh, yes, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that.
So do you think we need to get together again? Or I am sure Howard